October 24th, 1929. 6 hours. $14 billion. Gone. That's more than the entire Canadian economy was worth at the time. 13 million shares dumped in pure panic. Phone lines melted down. The stock exchange went dark. Communication cut off. And people are standing there screaming into dead receivers, wondering what just happened to their life savings. But here's what nobody tells you. The whole thing, the crash, the depression, the breadlines, the suicides, all of it traces back to one man, one decision, one press conference. A banker the newspapers called Sunshine Charlie. Sunshine Charlie. Genuinely. His real name was Charles Mitchell, and 7 months before Black Thursday, he stood up and said something he thought would save America. Instead, he pulled the pin on a grenade that exploded across an entire decade. The Great Depression. 10 years. Not a rough quarter, not a bad year. A decade of misery that rewired a whole generation of Americans. 25 million people lost their jobs. That's 1 in 4. Every fourth person you walked past on the street, out of work. 5,000 banks just locked their doors forever. Not temporarily closed, forever. Taking people's savings with them into the void. 2 million Americans lost their homes entirely, living in tent cities made of cardboard and broken dreams, places they sarcastically named Hoovervilles, after the president who definitely had it under control. He did not have it under control. Suicides jumped 30%. In the richest country on earth, people stood in lines for free bread. How does that happen? Let's go back to where it started. The 1920s in America were something else. Ford cars rolling off assembly lines, radios crackling in living rooms, jazz clubs, skyscrapers, the feeling that the good times were just getting started. Prosperity felt permanent. It always does, right? Before it isn't. Into this glittering scene steps Charles Edwin Mitchell. Born 1877, son of a farmer in Massachusetts, nothing about his childhood suggested he'd one day hold the financial fate of millions in his hands. But by 1919, he was running National City Bank, the biggest bank in America, sitting on $2.7 billion in assets, more than the entire government budget of most countries on Earth at the time. And Mitchell had an idea. A big one. A dangerous one, as it turned out. Before Mitchell came along, the stock market was a private club. Only about 500,000 Americans, less than 1% of the population, actually owned stocks. Regular people? They kept cash in banks, maybe bought bonds. Stocks were for the wealthy. Velvet ropes, secret handshake, you get it. Mitchell looked at this and saw something different. He saw everyone else, the other 99%, a market that hadn't been tapped yet. His pitch was almost noble-sounding. Why should wealth belong only to the wealthy? Every American deserves a shot at the dream. Beautiful sentiment. Catastrophic execution. In 1920, National City Company, a subsidiary, with one mission: sell stocks to ordinary Americans, through bank branches, to anyone who walked in. You'd come in to open a savings account and leave an investor, whether you understood what that meant or not. Mitchell turned selling stocks into a science. He studied psychology. He studied greed. He studied what ordinary Americans lay awake dreaming about. His salespeople weren't stuffy bankers shuffling papers. These were dream merchants, trained, polished, and placed in 69 branches across the country. The advertising was something. Newspapers ran ads. Get rich investing just $15 a month. Become a partner of American Telephone and Telegraph. Your children will be proud of you. Magazines ran stories about a secretary from Ohio who got rich in 2 years. A streetcar driver who bought his own house with dividends. The salespeople had scripts that'd make a timeshare pitch blush. Mr. Johnson, you don't want to work for someone else your whole life, do you? Mrs. Smith, your husband works for Ford. Why not become a co-owner? Office walls plastered with happy families in front of big houses. Thanks to stocks, we bought our dream home. Smiling kids, expensive cars, the whole fantasy. But the real genius, and the real poison, was the margin system. You only needed 10% of your own money. The bank let you to rest, so your $100 became $1,000 worth of stocks. A 20% gain, you doubled your money. Salespeople loved this example. Mr. Brown bought Radio Corporation stocks for $500, put down only $50. 6 months later, up $150. That's a 300% return. Compare that to the $15 your savings account would have earned, and suddenly, it's obvious, right? Obviously invest, obviously borrow, obviously go all in. Between 1925 and 1929, margin loans for stock purchases exploded from $2 billion to $8.5 billion, a 425% increase in 4 years. The number of American stockholders went from 500,000 to 10 million people. A teacher from Ohio mortgaged her parents' house for Radio Corporation stocks. A farmer in Kansas sold his cattle for General Motors. A mechanic in Detroit put 6 months of salary into Ford stock. Everyone believed this was their moment. And Mitchell? Mitchell was a genius, a hero, the democratizer of Wall Street. In 1928 alone, he earned $1.2 million, about $20 million in today's money. Magazines called him the man making every American a potential millionaire. Potential. That word doing a lot of work there? He didn't stop. He created investment trusts, funds that borrowed money to buy stocks. Then those trusts became their own companies, whose stocks were also bought on credit. A pyramid of debt stacked on the assumption that prices go up forever. Narrator voice, prices do not go up forever. By spring of 1929, even the optimists were getting nervous. Stock prices were disconnecting from reality. Companies trading at 15 times their annual profit, a ratio that today screams speculative bubble. The Federal Reserve saw it. On February 6, 1929, they sent a clear warning to banks. Stop issuing loans for stock speculation. Slow down the margin lending. The market wobbled. March 1929, stocks started sliding. Billions evaporated in days. Panic started building. It looked like maybe, just maybe, the bubble was about to deflate slowly enough to survive. And then Sunshine Charlie stepped up to a microphone. March 12, 1929, press conference. Mitchell looks into the cameras and says, and I want you to really hear this, National City Bank will provide the market with all the liquidity it needs. We will not allow an unnecessary crisis to occur. Bam! That's it. That's the moment. Newspapers the next morning, Sunshine Charlie saves the market. Stocks bounced back. The market recovered every loss in a week and charged to new records. The Federal Reserve's warning? Ignored. The correction? Canceled. The catastrophe? Postponed. And made so much worse. What followed was the final phase of madness. The Dow Jones hit 381 points in summer 1929, a record that wouldn't be touched for another 25 years. 3 million new investors piled in during the last few months before the crash. Wives secretly pawned jewelry to buy stocks. Shoe shiners were giving investment tips. Children spent pocket money on shares. Clerks became paper millionaires. Chauffeurs bought mansions. Secretaries bought fur coats. America was drunk on it. Joseph Kennedy, father of the future president, would later say that when his shoe shiners started giving him stock advice, he knew it was time to sell. Kennedy got out. Not everyone had the same instinct. Because behind all of it, the math was brutal, and it was always there. Every dollar in the market was backed by about 10 cents of real money. A 10% price drop wiped out a margin investor completely. A 50% drop meant they owed the bank more than they'd earn in a year. Large institutional investors, pension funds, insurance companies were already reading the warning signs by October. Industrial production slowing, car sales falling, construction dropping. But stocks were still climbing, completely detached from what the actual economy was doing. Insiders heard the Bank of England was about to raise rates, which would force the Fed to follow, which would make margin loans more expensive, which would trigger mass selling. The smart money began quietly, carefully, getting out. By October, patience ran out. Morning of October 24, 1929. New York's largest investment funds made their move. Coordinated, simultaneous. They started dumping shares in massive blocks, hundreds of thousands of shares at once. Prices started dropping, slowly at first, then like an avalanche. By noon, full panic. 13 million shares in one day. 5 times the normal volume. Brokers physically couldn't process the orders. Phone systems collapsed. The exchange went dark, and Mitchell's dominoes started falling, one by one by one by one. Falling prices triggered margin calls. Investors had no cash to cover, so they sold more stocks, which crashed prices further, which made stocks worthless as loan collateral, which made banks stop lending, which drained the market of every last drop of liquidity, which caused banks, the ones that had followed Mitchell's playbook, to start failing. October 29th, Black Tuesday, the final blow. In a single day, Americans lost $14 billion, more than the United States spent on all of World War I. In one day. And behind the numbers? Real people. Edward Hopkins, a mechanic from Detroit, he'd put his entire life savings, $5,000, into Ford stock. By November, those shares were worth $200. The bank wanted $3,000 more. Edward hanged himself in his garage. Mary Cafield, a teacher from Ohio, the one who mortgaged her parents' house, watched the bank repossess it. 3 generations of one family out on the street. In New York, lines formed at banks, yes, but also at bridges. The Brooklyn Bridge became a symbol of despair. People who were paper millionaires on Monday were gone by Friday. What happened to Sunshine Charlie? In 1933, he sat before Congress. Senator Carter Glass looked at him and asked, "Do you consider yourself responsible for the ruin of millions of American families?" Mitchell replied that he just wanted to give people a chance to get rich, that nobody forced them to buy stocks. Nobody forced them, right. Justice showed up anyway, in the form of a tax evasion charge, $850,000 in unpaid taxes. He was forced out of the bank in complete disgrace. The man newspapers once celebrated as the savior of American markets booed on the streets of New York. A Detroit paper wrote that he'd stolen more from Americans than any bank robber in history, because a robber takes a bag of money, but Mitchell took the future from an entire generation. His supporters said he didn't force anyone to do anything, that any banker in his position would have done the same. Maybe that's the most disturbing part of all. Maybe it's true. Mitchell spent the rest of his life in obscurity, moved to Europe, worked as a consultant, came back in the 1940s, started a small investment company, died in 1955 at 78, never once acknowledging what he'd set in motion. Sunshine Charlie went out quietly, which is more than 25 million unemployed Americans got. The wreckage he left behind forced America to rebuild its financial system from scratch. The Glass-Steagall Act of 1933 separated commercial and investment banking. No more gambling with depositors' money. The Securities and Exchange Commission came into existence. Bank deposit insurance? Strict margin requirements. America looked at the rubble and swore, never again. Then, because this is the part that never gets old, President Roosevelt signed an executive order in April 1933 that nobody saw coming. Private citizens were banned from owning gold. All of it. Americans had to hand over their gold coins and bars to the government at a fixed price. Desperate move to break the link between gold and dollars so they could print their way out of deflation. In 1 month, Americans surrendered more than 3,600 tons of gold, more than Russia and China's current combined reserves. And a year later, the government raised the official gold price from $20 to $35 an ounce and pocketed billions on the metal they just confiscated. never gets old. The Great Depression took 10 years to climb out of. An entire generation never trusted banks again. Some kept cash under mattresses until they died. Now, take a breath. Today, 50 million Americans trade stocks through apps on their phones. Margin loans have hit $900 billion, a record. Apps promise zero commissions, easy trades, democratized investing. A new generation pours money into meme stocks and crypto on borrowed margins. The same loans, the same promises, the same mechanism Mitchell built, wearing different clothes. The average American currently owes more than they earn in a year. Margin trading is back at 1929 levels, and millions of people believe with complete sincerity that this time is different. It's never different, but sure. Mitchell genuinely believed he was doing something good. He wanted ordinary people to have what rich people had, and his system worked. Right up until it catastrophically, devastatingly, generationally didn't. The American dream he promised turned into a nightmare for 1 in 4 Americans. Every American should be a capitalist, Mitchell said in 1928. Everyone should invest, they say today. History doesn't repeat, but the pitch does, word for word. Next time someone promises to democratize your finances, to finally give the little guy a seat at the table, just ask yourself one question. Who's really walking away from that table richer? Most people won't. Most people never do. That's kind of the whole point of Money Never Learns. But if you're still here, you're already doing better than most. Subscribe button's right there. More Sunshine Charlie's where this came from.